For 3 weeks, I was held in a room. If I tried to get away, they would tie me to the bed. I couldn't eat. I could barely sleep, and I couldn't speak. Groups of people would come into the room and look at me and talk about me and sometimes undress me. I was shot full of drugs. I was too weak to move. I couldn't see my body, but I had been cut nearly in half. There was insects on the walls and ceiling. I was in a boat in the bottom of an underground waterway. I was in a deep well. I was tethered to the ground by rubber tubes attached to my genitals. I was in a space pod. I was on a raft, in a library, in a conference room, in a fly-by-night health clinic. I was in the Arctic. I was in the desert. They were trying to kill me. They would try to get me into a room separate from everyone else or wait till late at night. I had found out about their secret pornography ring. I tried to tell my partner about this in hushed tones because I didn't want them to hear me and redouble their efforts. Where was I? They asked me this every day, and I didn't know the answer. I was in the intensive care unit, the ICU of one of the best hospitals in the world, where doctors and nurses were using the most current medical technologies and know-how to save my life. A few months later, after I'd gotten home from the hospital, I went to see the surgeon for a checkup. And I told him about these terrible memories and the resulting diagnosis of PTSD. He said, "PTS what?" People don't generally remember anything from the ICU. Why then was I having nightmares and flashbacks and sleeplessness? Was it because I was weak? Did I lack resilience? Was I too sensitive? Was I crazy? Why was it so hard to do the things in my life that previously had been fairly easy? Why couldn't I seem to move forward? And why wasn't I perfect the way the surgeon said I would be when I recovered physically? What had happened to me in the hospital? They saved my life, and for this I am deeply grateful. But life after this ICU experience was extraordinarily difficult. The surgeon said maybe these memories had helped me to survive. But the memories weren't of things that had really happened. There was no pornography ring. There was no insects on the walls and ceiling. The staff was trying to save my life, not kill me. The memories weren't real, and intellectually I knew this, but the feelings that were associated with memories were just as if they were really real. So I started to look on the internet for answers, and I found the medical term delirium. Delirium is a brain disorder, and it includes confusion, disorganized thinking, sort of misunderstanding of the things going on around you, and hallucinations. And the intensive care unit is a perfect storm for creating delirium. The isolation, narcotics, sleeplessness, being separated from everything that is from your normal everyday life. And why is delirium a problem? It's a serious complication in the ICU, and it can lead to more days on the ventilator, more chance of infection, and a greater likelihood that you will die while in the ICU. And it's also connected with post-ICU syndrome. Post-ICU syndrome is long-term cognitive and psychological problems. The Wall Street Journal reported on some research on this recently, and they said 3 out of 4 patients in the ICU develop delirium, and more than half exhibit effects similar to Alzheimer's disease and traumatic brain injury 1 year later. Most people have heard of heart attacks and often even know what the symptoms are and how to get help. But very few people have heard of post-ICU syndrome, even though 3 times as many people are affected by it every year in the US as are affected by heart attacks. And yet there's some resistance to hearing our stories. After all, we saved your life and you're still bitching about this. But the truth is, for some people, this post-ICU syndrome and the cognitive and psychological problems associated with it are so difficult that they just as soon have died. These cognitive problems include understanding, remembering, learning, and thinking. And so for some people, they can't do their jobs, or they can't do their jobs the way they used to, and they can't necessarily even live the lives that they lived before. And even our friends and family really would rather hear that this brush with death has made us better people or stronger, not weaker and more challenged. But maybe my surgeon was onto something when he said these memories had helped me to survive. I'm an artist, and I practice art as a way to better understand the world around me and to interpret it and my life. My partner is an artist as well, and when I was in the ICU, she brought in a sketchbook and a pencil, and she was trying to re-engage me in the world, so she asked me to draw the dog that we might get when I got home from the hospital. My first attempt was just 2 or 3 jagged lines, but in a few days I was able to draw something with ears and legs. I'm a filmmaker, or I was a filmmaker before I was in the hospital, but when I got home, I was too weak to even think about making a film, but I was strong enough to draw. And so I started to make drawings based on my memories. I created for myself a Birdgirl avatar. I had thought about birds and talked about them while I was in the hospital, and I thought about them as something that went between earth and heaven. And they negotiated that space that for me was a metaphor for the space between life and death, and that sort of delirium that I had inhabited. I made a series of over 100 drawings based on, for instance, things I had written in the hospital and I brought home on the notebook and then traced onto drawings and drew around them. It turns out that this process of drawing was a key to my healing. It was a way to sort of reconstruct that shattered self. And I was able to start to sort out what had happened to me and to separate what had really happened from my memories of what had happened. And this, for people with delirium, this is a very important step in recovery. I eventually was strong enough to make another film, and I made a film called On a Phantom Limb. And it utilized this Birdgirl avatar. And I was further able to explore the experience and try to show what it was like. Another important part of my healing was music. While I was in the ICU, my partner Drew helped to save my life. She bought an iPod and put on it music that she thought I would want to hear. And this music on headphones was a place that I could go. It was safe, and it was stimulating, and it was interesting. I remember my favorite song, I think, from that time was Stevie Wonder's Living for the City. And in the song, he creates a soundscape of New York. And this was a place I could travel to, away from the horror. One of my first thoughts when I surfaced and became a little more coherent in ICU was that music is the most important thing. And I still believe this is true. When I got home from the hospital, music again was part of my recovery. I listened to songs that would make me weep, and still those same songs will make me weep today. But that weeping is part of getting out the trauma of this experience. I think everybody should wear a medical alert bracelet. And on it, it should list the songs or music to play for you in case of emergency. Now, why aren't more people talking about post-ICU syndrome? Where are the voices of the more than 2 million people affected by this every year? I have a couple of theories. One is that we know that people 65 years and older represent more than half of the people in ICU. And I fear that when these older people come home from a prolonged ICU stay and they start to show signs of dementia, their friends and family may just accept this as a natural decline. What needs to be done is people need to talk to their healthcare providers and see if these symptoms are reversible. And avoidance. Avoidance is a very common reaction to trauma. Nobody wants to think and talk about things that are triggering of stressful and terrible memories. And there's no easy fix for it. There's no pill or clear drug therapy for post-ICU syndrome or for PTSD. It's a long and complex journey for those of us dealing with this. And Oliver Sacks writes about hallucinations in his book by that title. And he says that hallucinations constitute a severe challenge to a person's worldview and belief system. And this makes them something that people find hard to reconcile and place within their life experience. Now, I can't do the studies that might show that music and art are effective therapies for people experiencing delirium or post-ICU syndrome. But those studies are being done. And researchers and hospitals believe now that maybe a third of these delirium cases can be prevented. But what I can do is to tell my story and to share my artwork. And my drawings have been used in PowerPoints, hundreds of PowerPoints by researchers working on delirium, trying to share this with others. And I can continue to update my blog and web pages for those of us that need more information. And I also can share advice from my experiences. For those people like me, reach out, talk about your memories, draw, dance, do physical therapy, do talk therapy, listen to music, learn new things, talk to your doctor, ask for help. And for friends and family, notice those changes in your loved ones, whether they're in the hospital and they're acting strangely, let the staff know. When you get home, talk to somebody if they seem to have cognitive and psychological changes. And don't give up on that older person who comes home from a prolonged ICU stay showing signs of dementia. These symptoms could be reversible. This is the time to coordinate care between the cognitive, the psychological, and the physical. The sooner we get help, the better we do.